Hello, everyone, and welcome to tonight's virtual conversation. We have a Q&A on the presentation, so if you have any questions about connecting or having any tech issues, please let us know. My name is Rachel Egelhoff, and we are still waiting for a couple of our presenters, but I thought that I would get started and share a little bit about what we'll be doing tonight. Again, my name is Rachel Egelhoff. I am the MFamily Program Manager at U of M in the Dean of Students office. And tonight we're going to talk about housing for the 24-25 academic year and helping you explore what options exist for your student and how to make the best decisions for you and your student for next year. This session is meant to be conversation style. So like I said, we have a Q&A. If you have questions, please pose them in the Q&A function. Throughout the evening, we will take a look at those, we will compile those, and then after everyone has presented, we will attempt to answer all of your questions as best we can. This session will be recorded, so if there are questions that we don't get to by the end of the evening, you will receive an email with the video, the slides, and all of the answers to your questions. So if we have questions that are left over, you will get responses to those in an email in the next week or two. Again, this conversation is being recorded, just so that you know. And like I said, please use the Q&A function throughout the evening. Just a little bit before we start about the MFamily program. The MFamily program is in the Dean of Students office in the Division of Student Life. MFamily is the university's parent and family engagement program, and it lets campus leaders connect with families, give them timely information, resources, a newsletter that's compiled from the family's interests. So we encourage you to register for the MFamily portal if you haven't done so already. You'll get notifications about events happening on campus, things like these conversations, and other things like Parent and Family Weekend or helpful tips for your students and you. So you can either go to family.campusesp.com, or you can take a picture of the QR code, scan it with your phone right now, and that will take you to the website. If you haven't already signed up, you can go ahead and get started. And we would love to have you join so that we can keep you informed and offer resources for you. One of the people that we have with us tonight is Nicole Banks. Nicole is also in the Dean of Students office. She is the Associate Dean of Students, and she will be helping to moderate the Q&A, combine all of your questions, and help us to seamlessly, as best we can, answer them at the end of the session. So with that, I am going to turn it over to the speakers to introduce themselves. We are going to start with Jordan.
Good evening, everyone. Jordan Borker, he, him, his pronouns, and I serve as an assistant director and the interfraternity council advisor in the fraternity and sorority life department at the University of Michigan.
Good evening, everybody. My name's Mark Simmons, and I am the program manager for Beyond the Diag, also located in the Dean of Students office, and I will be sharing information about off-campus housing.
It looks like we are still missing a couple of speakers who will introduce themselves at a later date, at a later time. So we're going to go ahead and get started with the presentation. And we will start, if it's okay with you, Mark, we will start with Jordan talking about fraternity and sorority life.
Yeah, of course. So at the University of Michigan, we have four councils, four governing bodies that serve and support about 50 plus organizations. What we like to say here at the in fraternity sorority life is that we have four councils, but one community. Our department of about 11 staff members supports those 50 plus fraternities and sororities. And you can kind of see there our councils listed. The Interfraternity Council, who is comprised of 18 organizations, and they're affiliated fraternities that provide opportunities for friendship, brotherhood, and leadership development. our Multicultural Greek Council, comprised of 12 organizations who promotes multiculturalism through programming and service housed in several racial, ethnic, and cultural communities. Our National Panhellenic Council, also referred to as the Divine Nine, are composed of 8 of our 9 fraternities and sororities who celebrate and promote Black Afro-diasporic pride, history, and culture. And finally, our Panhellenic Association, which are 17 organizations who support sisterhood, leadership development, philanthropy, and a lot of other things. So for fraternity and sorority life, both the Panhellenic Association and the Interfraternity Council have member organizations on campus that have recognized chapter housing facilities. Although we work hand in hand with those organizations, we do not own or operate any of those chapter facilities. Those are independently owned and operated by either a local alumni group or a national housing board. Now, you typically will see our Multicultural Greek Council and National Panhellenic Council organizations who do not have chapter facilities still living with their members somewhere off campus, typically. But to kind of talk through, right, what are the benefits of living in a fraternity sorority facility? Well, I think first off is that they provide a financially competitive rental rates that are often less than the surrounding areas in Ann Arbor. 8-month leases, for both the fall and winter semesters. Panhellenic chapters all have live-in house advisors. These are staff members who are hired to both support and oversee what's going on in the chapter facilities, and kind of handling the facility aspects and logistic aspects for any of these amenities in that chapter facility. And a few of our IFC chapters also have live-in advisors, but not all IFC chapters have live-in advisors. Then finally, some amenities, they vary, but it could include a house designated on-site chef or catered meal, exercise rooms, study spaces, and parking, which I think is always very prime here at the University of Michigan and in the Ann Arbor community. Outside of the benefits, right, of being a part of a fraternity or sorority facility, there's also obligations, housing obligations that are associated with membership in a fraternity or sorority. The primary ones, right, as a Panhellenic sorority, they do require that their chapter facilities are full. They could range from 30 students that live in to 70. So it really depends depending on which organization maybe your student would join if they do. And each of those, like I said, has different room capacities, and they set their own processes to determine who gets to live in. IFC fraternities must have enough residents to kind of operate the building successfully. That can range, but that number is kind of within that, between like 20 to maybe 40, depending on which chapter facility you're discussing. If a student is planning to join a fraternity or sorority in the winter 2024 semester, they should not sign a lease on another residence until the housing requirement for their chapter they join is determined. I say this because a lot of folks are starting to register for primary Panhellenic Association recruitment, and it's usually an expectation that your first year, in your sophomore year, that you're living in that chapter facility. Obviously, that information and those questions can be asked to those individual chapters, but it's common practice and usually an expectation that you're living in after you join and into that next year. And if a student does end up not living in a chapter house, there are still housing options available. University housing and Beyond the Diag can help students who need assistance. The other thing I would like to share is that our website, fsl.umich.edu, has a page on specifically Panhellenic sorority housing costs and information. And in that, it kind of just goes through each sorority house and provides information like the cost and any information around both housing costs as well as membership costs and any kind of descriptions of what they get out of the money that they're paying. IFC, the Interfraternity Council, does not have a page like that, but we typically ask students or families and parents is that definitely ask those questions before agreeing on anything. Before you join an organization, it should be pretty apparent to make sure that you're asking some of those questions around any financial obligation, whether it's membership costs or financial costs.
Thank you, Jordan. We are going to back up just a little bit and go to our housing.
Fabulous.
And we are going to welcome Amir.
Hi, everyone. Hi there. So, as you may know, actually, for first years, about 98% do live on campus, and the university is definitely committed to creating a space for as many of that first year class, virtually all they can. What that means is to kind of maintain that guarantee that your student is enjoyed right now, is that for the second year and beyond, its housing is not guaranteed for on campus. And about 75%, as you can see, actually typically live off campus in year 2, and that number increases as the years go on. Often, though, and this is really important, the students that they find that they're going to live off campus with are people they met in the residence halls. That's one of the most common things, is that people live on their own for the first time, experience what it's like, get a sense of what they need and the people they want to work with, and they bond and they go off campus, sort of recreating or carrying over the community that they built in the residence hall, with obviously the added responsibilities they're often now ready for of living a little more independently in off-campus housing. But let's say your student is really interested in what on-campus housing can offer in year 2. We absolutely do house a good portion, see that 25% of the class in housing the next year. So where are those rooms? There isn't just a upper level student residence hall. Maybe some years ago there used to be, but actually now every hall is a mixture. So we've got places in Central, North. There are lots and lots of singles. Typically, singles are the room type that our returning students want to snap up. Singles often are sort of the best of both worlds, right? Your student has an experience as a double in their first year or a triple. They say, you know what? I love the residence hall experience. I want all the support. I want my bathroom cleaned by a professional. But it would be great if I had my own space. And so a lot of our returning students pick singles. Now, there are, as I mentioned, a limited number of spaces overall, but the key to this is that unlike with your first year, housing is not something that gets spit out of a magical black box after you write down what you hope will come out of it. Actually, and we'll take a look at the timeline in a little bit, returning students get to go online in February and March and select from different floor plans and find the room that they want. And so they can say, oh, hey, a bunch of my friends, we actually all want to be in singles next to each other in Stockwell. Well, that's possible. They can go online, see what's available. And if it is, fantastic. They can make it happen. So it's not, put your request in and get what you get. Actually, the students have a lot of agency. If they go online and see nothing they want, there's no obligation to stay. They can go off campus if they like or explore other options. So we do have a number of suites on offer. What is a suite? Well, it's actually a very large space. In some cases, it's 2 levels. There's a staircase in the middle with at least 1 large bathroom, often 2 or 3, with 5 to 8 individual bedrooms. Some of those bedrooms are doubles, some of those are singles. And again, that's like a little bit of off-campus life, but with the network all around, the security, the dining hall, the lock systems of a residence hall. The key to all this, though, is there's no obligation to sign your contract. You can pick the room, and then even then, you have a chance to sign your contract and you can change your mind. Say, you know what? I'm not in this. No harm done. We're not offended. You got to do you and discover what's right for you. It could be that students have their heart set on living on campus, but they browse and they just see, do you know what? I just don't see the location that works for me. And location for a lot of students is the single biggest factor in determining where they want to live, because they're thinking, okay, I'm going to be near the music school quite a bit. I'm going to have to be. So I better find a place that's near it. Now, another path for living on campus, and a good number of the students who are in that percentage that returns, is through a living learning community. As you know, we've got 2 kinds: themes, which are associated with housing and don't have an academic component, and the Michigan learning communities, which do. So students who are currently in an MLC, 100% can actually go to their current MLC and say, hey, I'm interested in returning next year as a peer mentor. And some of those MLCs will want to have returning students who are not RAs, they're mentors. They're returning students who have some experience. They know how things are in this place, and they can get a spot in the incoming cohort. So that's on a MLC by MLC basis, and your students should check it out. In addition, though, we also have some theme communities that are really just for returning residents. If a student applies to one of these themes and they get in, they more or less know they've got a space in that hall. So International Impact is kind of an international studies themed one. That's in North Quad. Cheever, that focuses on women in leadership, and that is in an all-female building, Newberry. And the second year experience, which is in Stockwell. All of these buildings will also have first years in them, and perhaps some 3rd-year level students or 4th-year level students, but they have carved out in them a special community for second-year residents. So let's check out the next slide. All right, so pretty straightforward. We want to take the pressure off. We know a lot of students are interested in housing right now, which is why we're having this get together. That said, we view it as wise for on-campus housing anyway to cool off a little bit, explore your options. So really, it's not until January that the week of theme housing goes live. That means we can apply to one of those returning themes. It takes a while for us to go through those applications and determine it. But by January 12th, we ask students just to register to be a part of returning resident housing. Just explore. I just want to explore it. No obligation to sign on there whatsoever, but you do have to register or you can't participate in it. You'll get a time slot where you go online and select. You just check things out, click on buildings, see what you've got. We're hoping this year we can get some floor plans as well that you can actually look at the rooms before you can actually select them. And then later February, we'll issue a contract and say, okay, now that you've selected it, now you've thought about it, do you actually want to live here? And if you don't, again, no hard feelings. We totally understand there is a wealth of choices out there, and you've got to do what's right for you. And by February of the next year, you probably know what's right for you. So with that, that's kind of how the on-campus housing process works. A couple of avenues.
Thank you, Amir. We are skipping ahead as we already did fraternity and sorority life, and we are going to head beyond the diag with Mark.
Hi, folks. So beyond the diag is, and I'm just going to give a little bit of background context to it, just so to help folks understand what we're talking about when we talk about beyond the diag. The program was established in 2011. As I mentioned when I introduced myself earlier, it is a program within the Dean of Students Office. So we work closely with the other pieces and parts and programs within the Dean of Students Office. And very much part of that mission is about providing support and resources to students who are living off campus. So the work of the Dean of Students Office is around providing support and resources and connecting with students in general. And then within that, Beyond the Diag is about supporting students who are living off campus or potentially considering living off campus. We provide both professional staff support and peer support to those students, and we do that in a number of ways, including face-to-face office hours in the Dean of Students Office. And we have quite a range of activities and engagement opportunities throughout the year. We recently had our fall housing fairs take place, where we had record attendance at our in-person housing fairs. We have lots of programming that takes place throughout the years, and other ways to both find out information and connect with us as well. So I know that we're here to talk about housing and the housing options that might exist if you're considering living off campus and you're trying to begin to think about how do I go about doing that. So the first place that we'd encourage you to start if you're thinking about housing off campus is our off-campus housing search website. You might see it sometimes described as the off-campus housing listing service, but this is essentially where we want you to begin your housing search process. You can see the web address there on the screen. It's offcampushousing.umich.edu. If you go to that website, it will have the look and feel of a, regular apartment rental website. It gives you opportunities to search by all of the different criteria that you'd normally expect to see on a website like that. And I'll talk you through a few of those details in just a second. Ann Arbor does also have a number of cooperatives, co-ops, as they're often called. These are slightly different housing arrangements where you're kind of more actively engaged with and contributing to a community. So the format and the living arrangement is slightly different, but that can often be a cheaper alternative for people who are interested in living in Ann Arbor, but maybe potentially reducing their rent costs. There are lots of different co-ops around the city. Many of them are managed by ICC, the Intercooperative Council, although there are some other co-ops as well. And that may be a different option if you're thinking about a co-op type environment. So when we're encouraging people to think about the housing search process, and we know that this is kind of the peak of the beginning of housing search season, really, there are several things that we want students to be thoughtful about before they jump in and actually go ahead and start paying money and signing a lease and committing to their housing for the following year. The terms of a lease is really important for many students. A lease may be the first time that student has signed a legally binding contract, certainly a legally binding contract that is connected to such a significant sum of money. And we really encourage students to think carefully about the lease, review it. If you're not sure exactly what you're reviewing, and many people, including myself, are not legal experts, so we have our student legal services team here at the university. These are licensed attorneys, licensed to practice law in the state of Michigan, and the student legal services team particularly includes a housing attorney who has specific expertise in all of these areas related to leases and tenant rights and housing law, and would be happy to review the lease with you, and would far prefer doing that than trying to kind of extricate you from a tricky situation if you've signed a lease that you're having second thoughts about. It's important to think about what are your rights and also your responsibilities. Make sure that you fully understand what is expected of you, and make sure that anything that your landlord has committed to, that you have that in writing. Ideally, it's part of the lease, but if not, then certainly having that in writing is important, so you've got a reference point if you need to go back and discuss what they committed to at a later point. We are conscious of and aware of, scam activity. It's another reason why we encourage people to use the website that I provided before. It does reduce the risk of being a victim of a scam. And it also just makes sure that the information that you're getting is accurate, but just be thoughtful about the information you're reviewing. If you're seeing a price that seems way different than other prices out there in the marketplace, or someone is promising something that doesn't seem very realistic, you may need to be thoughtful about whether or not that seems like a legitimate advert. It's important to think about where you're going to live in terms of not just do you like the area, do you like the location, but what are your transportation plans? How are you planning to get to campus each day? How are you planning to get to the grocery store or the gym or other places around campus, other places around the city where you may want to spend your time? If you're planning to bring a car, is there somewhere to park? Do you need to pay for parking, or is that included in the price of rent? So transportation is important. If you're not planning to bring a car, are you using public transportation? Are you planning to bring a bike or something similar to that? So those are all important things to think about as you begin to go through that process of where you'd like to live. It's really important to think about who you want to live with. You might be friends with someone that you met in a class, or you might be friends with someone that you met at a social event, and that is wonderful. Does that automatically mean that there'll be a great roommate? Maybe, maybe not. But think through those different things that go into what will be a good roommate for you. Do you have the same approaches to chores, study plans, paying bills, visitors? When do they like to go to bed? When do you like to go to bed? These are all really important conversations to have, again, ideally before you sign a lease, because once you've signed a lease, it's really hard to pull back. And we can be helpful if a conflict arises. There are support and resources available within the DUNIF Students Office, and we also work closely with other offices on campus who can connect students with resources if a conflict arises. And that might be a conflict between students, or it might be a conflict between students and their landlord. Either way, we want to respond to that. We want to be supportive and helpful as students navigate that, providing what information we can, what support is available, and hopefully helping to find a resolution to that conflict. Obviously, budgeting is a really important thing, and we know it's a reality for many students that they just need to be aware of, the costs of their rent, what goes into that cost, not just the rent itself, but does that include utility bills? Does it include parking fees? Are there surcharges for certain things? Again, all of those things should be included in the lease, but it's really important to make sure that you understand exactly what you're meant to be paying each month and exactly how that payment is going to be taken. So as you're beginning to think about kind of talking to your student about where they're going to live and thinking through those important considerations, some of them I've just mentioned there, lengths and types of leases are also important to think through. In general, the majority of leases in Ann Arbor tend to be a 12-month lease, but that isn't always the case. Some leases are shorter. There might be a 6-month lease or an 8-month lease. If you are looking for something that is a specific length, you can ask the landlord whether they are willing to adjust the length of their lease. They might say no, but it's always worth asking the question. Again, once you sign the lease, it's very, very, very difficult to adjust the terms of it. We often work with students who have signed a 12-month lease and say, but I only need it for 8 months. And, the important thing to be aware of is, but you're paying the rent for the whole 12 months, whether or not you're physically living in the apartment or the house. So just thinking through the plan for those other months, it might be that you're planning to sublet. It might be that you're planning to remain in the property even over the spring and summer. But just having that conversation and being thoughtful about that is really important. Renters insurance is always one that we want to emphasize. Most landlords do not include renters insurance in their lease. That is something that the tenant is usually expected to get for themselves. So please make sure that you have renters insurance in the event that there is some type of property damage, a storm, a fire, a flood, something like that. in general, the landlord's insurance will cover the building. It will not cover your property as the renter. So just be aware of that, and obviously make sure your possessions are protected. Really important to make an inventory checklist. Do that at the beginning of the tenancy, just so you know and the landlord knows exactly what is in the property. There have been some recent ordinances passed by the City of Ann Arbor. Important to emphasize, these are not ordinances passed by the University of Michigan. We don't control them. They are City of Ann Arbor ordinances, but they do impact different rights in relation to when and how leases can be signed, when and how people can renew their leases. I would probably encourage people to connect with the City of Ann Arbor website information for the fine details on that, although there is information on the Beyond the Diag website if you have questions about particularly the early leasing ordinance and the right to renew ordinances that were passed in the last couple of years. So we launched a campaign called Take Time Before You Sign. I want to say 2 years ago now. It was while many things were still virtual and we were kind of navigating the virtual in-person space during COVID. And it was born out of a series of in-person workshops that were developed that were really, just as the name suggests, just encouraging students to be thoughtful and think through those steps of the process and really taking time before you sign. What are all the things that you need to consider before you put pen to paper, or probably these days click the mouse button, and actually commit to a particular lease, to a particular tenancy? It's a series of videos. Each video is about 1 minute long, so very short, very snappy, very easy to watch and quick to watch, but just gives a great little overview of a different element, a different aspect of that housing search process. You can watch all of the videos back to back, straight through in less than 10 minutes, but it's just really helpful to begin that process of thinking through kind of how do I go about this process and make sure it works as well as possible. I think we maybe have one of the videos queued up and we can maybe take a look at that. Or maybe not.
My apologies, but the video is not coming through. So I put the link to the video in the chat. I will give everyone a few minutes to watch that video if you'd like before we move on to registration.
And I will briefly just add that the link takes you to a page that hosts actually all 7 videos. You certainly don't feel the need to watch all 7 right now, but if you choose to watch one of them, the look and feel is very similar for all 7. So if you wanted to watch all of them, you can certainly do that after today's webinar is done. And as always, if you've got more questions, you can certainly come back to us.
All right. We are going to move on to registration as promised. One of our presenters was unable to make it tonight, so you get me instead. I am not in enrollment services. However, as I mentioned at the beginning of the webinar, you will receive all of the slides and access to this recorded presentation within a week. And so you will be able to see all of these. There's a lot of information in registration and in the next few slides. And there are also some supplemental slides to help you remember dates and places and where to look for certain things when thinking about enrollment for winter semester. So this goes through how is it determined that your student registers? The date and time are designated by the following criteria. So credits that have matriculated as a student at U of M or another higher education institution, college credit earned through tests taken before matriculation, and then they're placed in priority blocks with 5 credit increments in each block. I won't read the slide to you. However, you can see that it shows you how the credits and the blocks are calculated, and then when the students can register. This is the timeline for registration. So registrations started November 6th, and the Backpack app opens and students can view their enrollment appointment in their Wolverine Access account. So students have access to Wolverine Access. They can look in there and view their enrollment appointment. November 13th to 15th, continuing graduate students register for winter semester. And then on the 16th, continuing undergraduate students register. Then winter term begins January 10th, which I believe is a Wednesday. And then January 23rd is the drop add deadline for full term courses and the financial aid deadline for full-time status. How does my student register? Again, we have a link here for a video. Students can register using Schedule Builder, Planner, or the search within the backpack to identify courses and registration and store them in their backpack. I will play this video for you. It's just a brief synopsis of how to use Backpack and how to register.
We're noticing that there's no audio playing right now.
Okay, well, I apologize for that. I will add the backpack video to the chat. I'm not sure why the sound isn't coming. I can hear it, so I apologize for that. While we pause to combine the questions and make sure that our presenters are prepared to answer them, please use the Q&A function if you still have questions that you'd like to submit. Nicole will be compiling them. And while we do that, we are going to give you just some quick ideas for things to send back with your student over break. One of the things that we suggest is either a box of open when letters or little notes or small gifts, stickers, things like that. So examples of what to write on the envelopes are open when you get to campus or open when you finish your first day of winter classes. It could just be an envelope with a note that says, I love you, or an envelope with some smiley stickers or little treats that your student likes. These are just some ideas that we have that students tell us that they really enjoy when they come back from being at home for a while and may find that they're a little bit homesick when they return to campus. And these are some examples of what students have shown us of some open when letters and little gifts from their families. So right now we're going to pause for our Q&A session. I'm going to stop sharing for a moment so that our presenters can answer the questions for you.
Thank you so much, Rachel, and thank you all for submitting so many thoughtful questions. I've taken some time to compile them. I want to say in advance that we will answer as many questions as we can in the time that is remaining. I do think there are a lot of common themes among questions, so I hope most people will feel that their questions were addressed and or they have some good guidance on where to find the additional detail that they're looking for that might be specific to their student situation. In all, there are about 30 some odd questions, so we'll do our best to get through them. I'm going to rotate between our different speakers with the questions so that we're able to cover the range of topics that are presented tonight with the questions. I want to start with Amir. Amir, thank you so much for all the information about housing. There is a particular interest in returning students being able to request housing. Can you give a little bit more detail about what returners should expect? And what I mean by that is some are asking, is it guaranteed that their returning student can receive housing on campus? And some are asking whether or not it's more like a lottery. Can you say more about how that works and what they should expect, please?
That's a great question because you're trying to calculate the different chances. So housing in a nutshell is not guaranteed. We typically are able to house most of the students who want to live on campus in their second year. Now we talk about what's the probability of that. The probability of that really increases dramatically the more your student is willing to live in different places. So for instance, if all they see is a particular room in one building and they're like, you know what, I don't care, as long as it's on campus, that's good, they're going to have a much higher chance than someone who says, you know what, I want to be on campus again, but I really want to be next to the nursing school. So it's hard to give you a probability. If you say, oh, but hey, my student has got, oh my gosh, they don't really mind. It just needs to be a rectangle with a bed in it. It's, again, not guaranteed, but their chances are genuinely much better. And we have a few students who aren't able to find housing from year to year, and some years we're able to accommodate everyone. It really depends on what the appetite is. So not a guarantee, but you're welcome to browse.
Thank you for that, Amir. Along those lines of looking at housing options for sophomore year, I'd like to pose this question to Jordan. Jordan, if a student has already committed to living with 4 or 5 other people in a house for next year, but they're also planning to go through Panhellenic formal recruitment in the winter, which the Panhellenic organizations, as you mentioned, tend to offer housing and expect their new members to live in. Can they postpone their live-in expectation to junior year if they accept the bid?
Yeah, thanks for the question. If someone does sign an off-campus residence lease prior to primary recruitment in January, it may affect your chances of receiving a bid from some chapters. What we suggest is that you're discussing any housing issues with said chapter before you make any decisions on joining or committing to that membership. Because sorority houses capacities vary, there are people who, like, the house might fill up before that obligation is expected, but know that it could affect your chances of receiving a bid from some chapters.
Any advice for women who participate in the Panhellenic recruitment process to discuss housing in the process, or wait until after they have completed recruitment and are interested in accepting a bid?
Yes, great follow-up. They should be definitely having those conversations during the primary recruitment process to be able to understand the obligations outside of housing, the financial obligations, the time obligations. But if they have those questions, they should be asking them. Panhellenic also offers a kickoff event before primary recruitment starts. That could also be an opportunity to ask those questions. But as I kind of mentioned, that generally, not always, members live in the sorority house 1 year after they join the chapter. It might look a little bit different, but definitely be asking those questions, and any question that you have during that primary recruitment process. That's what it is expected to be, is for you to be able to answer all of your questions. And as I mentioned earlier in the session, there is a link on our website that goes to our Panhellenic Association page, and then there's a page just on financial housing obligations. And each chapter has a quick slide deck of their organization and their financial obligations.
Thank you, Jordan. Next question is from Mark. Mark, if you would first please say a little bit about the ordinance in Ann Arbor for the timelines for off-campus renting. And then if you could also add any resources or support for students whose landlords are not apparently honoring those timelines if they're feeling pressure to renew.
Yeah. So I think the first thing to restate is that these are City of Ann Arbor ordinances. They were not introduced by the University of Michigan. They are not managed or enforced by the university, and we don't have a direct link to them. Obviously, we're well aware that student renters in the city make up a large proportion of overall renters in the city, and therefore these ordinances do significantly impact students. So they were brought in, like I said, a year or two ago, in response to the fact that the leasing season, if you want to call it that, had gotten earlier and earlier and earlier, to the point where students were wanting to begin house hunting often as early as September or October, and landlords were also responding to that and also wanting to promote and market their properties and encourage people to view properties and sign leases, sometimes if they'd only been in the property for 2 or 3 weeks even, to sign a lease for the following year, 12 months later. And we realized that's a really difficult situation for students to be in. Students who've maybe just moved in, they've barely been living in the property any time, and they're already having to think about housing for the following year. So these ordinances were introduced as a way to, well, they were intended to try and slow down that process, to try and kind of give the housing market and the leasing market a bit more time before it ramps back up. And students are searching for housing. So what the ordinance says is that if a property has an existing tenant, then the existing tenant has the right to renew on that property up until 150 days from the end of the lease. So it's the end of the lease. Count back 150 days, which is more or less 6 months. And then at that point, that is kind of when the existing tenant has to decide whether or not they're going to stay in that property and renew the lease, or they're going to do something else. So what that means is, because a landlord is now required to offer an existing tenant that right to renew, then that changes when they're signing new leases. It doesn't mean that landlords can't show properties. It doesn't mean that landlords can't advertise properties. It doesn't mean that landlords can't actively, and some might say aggressively, promote their properties to students or to any tenants in the city. It just means that they have to make sure that a property, that the current tenant maintains that right to renew 150 days from the end of the lease. What that means in actuality, in terms of how the ordinance was structured, is that some landlords have developed wait lists, which is not signing a lease, but it may ask you for some sort of financial commitment. Sometimes that can be in the hundreds of dollars. And then there may be different terms and conditions on the circumstances in which you might get a refund for that waitlist money. If you choose to cancel your waitlist commitment, you might get a full refund, you might get a partial refund, or you might get zero refund. So again, it goes back to what I was saying earlier. You if you feel like you're getting close to being ready to commit to a property, and certainly if you're opening your checkbook or getting ready to break out your credit card, really make sure you've understood the terms and conditions. Really make sure you've understood exactly what it is you're paying for. Are you signing a lease or are you joining a wait list? What is it that you're paying for? How might you get a refund if you change their mind? Are there situations where a landlord can change their mind? What does that look like? In any and all of these situations, if you've got any questions related to a lease or a lease signing, or you feel like a landlord is doing something that may be in breach of either Michigan housing law, federal housing law, or the local housing ordinances that I've mentioned, absolutely have a conversation with Student Legal Services. They can talk it through with you. They can tell you whether or not they think that that is potentially a breach of any of those codes and ordinances, and what your recourse might be in terms of how to address that.
Thank you so much, Mark. I also want to reiterate, these are a couple of questions about renters insurance. Whether on campus or off campus, renters insurance is important and helpful for every renter. If your student is living with roommates, they would still secure a renter's insurance policy for themselves and for their possessions. Gentlemen, help me if I'm missing something. I don't think that there are renters insurance policies are for groups. I do think each policy is held by an individual or individuals with a legal tie. But that being said, I will try to move on to other questions, but we'll pause to see if there's any correction about renters.
No, that's absolutely correct. Just because your housemate or your roommate might have insurance, that will not cover your stuff.
Thank you.
That's absolutely right.
Next question is for Amir. Amir, if a student is not starting at the university until winter semester and they're living in housing for that semester, is there a way that they could apply for the second year in housing before or after their arrival? There's some concern about the timeline to apply for the future
If
year.
I understand the situation, the student's starting in January, their first year, and will they be eligible to apply, a week later, register for returning resident housing? Yeah, absolutely. Yep. Basically, returning resident housing, that process is open to anyone who currently holds a contract. So if they're holding a contract on January 2nd, let's say, then we're good to go.
So I imagine the advice is for that student to arrive, understanding that timeline for applications will start immediately, and just being very vigilant for that information, checking their email.
Students who do miss it, let's say they were to miss it, we do have a late process in, say, March for students to walk up to the housing office and say, anything happening? And we'll put them on a list. And here's the thing, spaces just do open up as it happens throughout the summer. We are busy trying to house first-year students, but there are some spaces that are just right for returning students. So if you need housing, let us know. But if you can go through the process at the right timeline, that's ideal.
Thank you. Jordan, I have two questions for you. They're not related, but they're both short. The first one is where, and if you could put this in the chat, where can people get more information about specific fraternities? I imagine FSL has a site with links to individual chapters. Please advise. That's part one.
Okay, yes, fsl.umich.edu. I'll put it into the chat, is our homepage for Fraternity Sorority Life. There you can segment by council and then therefore segment by chapter. We have fraternities in all four councils, in three different councils, the MGC, the MPHC, and the IFC. But know that both the Multicultural Read Council and the National Panhellenic Council is a council both with fraternities and sororities.
Very cool. Thank you. The other part of your question, or the second question for you, if a student goes through IFC or Panhellenic recruitment as a sophomore, Are there many houses, meaning many chapters, that are accepting second and older students?
So definitely, I believe that sophomore students, and I can specifically speak for the IFC chapters, are accepting and are recruiting and engaging with our second year students. The primary pool are first year freshman students, but for either organization, or sorry, either council, IFC and Panhellenic, sophomore students are or can be a part of that primary pool. And we don't typically see juniors and seniors in the Panhellenic process, but there's nothing stopping any undergraduate student, as long as they meet the eligibility requirements for fraternity and sorority life, to join one of our fraternities or sororities.
Thank you so much. In the interest of time, I'm going to read the second question and then do my best to answer it. There's a question about whether or not there is financial assistance for living off campus. My response to that is that each year, the Office of Financial Aid will consider the cost of attendance, including tuition and fees and living expenses like rent and food and supplies. So a student's budget, if you will, is created to cover those fees, or at least recognize those fees. What it means is that our students who receive scholarships, grants, loans to cover their expenses on campus would likely receive similar or the same support to use toward their off-campus expenses. The difference is that rather than having a financial aid award go directly to your account and then pay a housing bill for a student who lives on campus, an off-campus student would receive a refund of any additional funds after tuition and fees, and they are to take that refund and use it toward their rent and living expenses. It's a very simplified explanation. There's more information available through the Office for Financial Aid, but do understand that yes, if a student is receiving assistance for tuition, fees, and living expenses, it would be applicable both on and off campus. One other question I think we have time for is for Amir. A participant has asked if siblings who identify with different genders would like to room together in university housing. Is this an option?
That is a great question. So I'd say in our typical process, we don't set up that way. That said, we understand that every situation is different. There's probably some context that we should know about. And we do have a gender inclusive housing community in East Quad. So what we really say is that's really case by case basis. Let us know. Maybe we've got something that would actually work. Maybe what we're thinking of actually really wouldn't work. It wouldn't be comfortable. It wouldn't be right. It's a question we've got before, and it's fallen different ways based on actually what the real underlying need is there. It may be if they're different ages, that may be difficult with the area if we want to keep first years and returners in their own communities, and so on. So we'd actually really welcome someone letting us know right now, reaching out saying, hey, would this fall under gender inclusive for us? And we can begin a conversation about it. We'd like to hear more.
Thank you so much, Amir. I want to thank all of the participants for very thoughtful questions. We have far more than we were able to answer, but please know that all will be captured. We will be answering those questions, and the document with the questions and answers will be forwarded to you with the recording of this session. I'll turn it back over to you, Rachel.
Thank you, everyone. We appreciate your thoughtful answers to all of the questions. I am going to share my screen one more time. And that is so that we can continue to have these conversations with you in mind. There is a QR code that you can scan. And if you scan that QR code, it will take you to a quick 7-question survey that not only helps us improve this session, but future sessions. And we'd love to know your ideas for future sessions? What are the most important things to you? What did you hear about today that you'd like to hear more about, or what didn't you hear about that you'd love to know about? Additionally, if you have any questions about today's session, again, we will send out the answers to all of your questions, the recording of the session, and all of the slides. So you'll have all of the information that we have here tonight. And if you have any questions or specific questions that you didn't submit tonight that you think of at 3 o'clock in the morning, please email the MFamily program at umich.edu, and we will try to get through them as quickly and as accurately as possible. I thank you all for joining tonight. I thank all of our presenters, and we hope that you have a wonderful evening, and go blue.
See you, folks.